Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the David Icke Connector Videocast. Unless you've been living on the moon, you would have seen over the last few days just how much we've been attacked in terms of having our content deleted. Yesterday, we've had our entire Iconic network videos deleted off of Vimeo. So me and my dad are going to get into that and various other things today. Dad, how are you doing, mate?
Oh, I'm a bit bored, really, and nothing's happened, has it? I would also say that we are in the process of getting Iconic back up in a way that does not depend on the usual suspects. Now, you can look at what's been going on, and you can see it as a negative thing. And you can see it as confirmation of the power that this cult that I've been exposing for 30 years has over the world. But there's another way of looking at it, which I would suggest is where you get the real truth. Let's just analyze the last few days. We have a Silicon Valley mafia, and we have the mainstream media in its newspaper, radio, and televisual form. We have the BBC, unfortunately, but we do. And 24/7, they are pounding out the official narrative of everything. They are pounding out the official narrative of the coronavirus outbreak and everything else. They don't include in their reporting or the debate those that are challenging the narrative in all these areas. So we have a global media from which the vast majority of people get their fake information. And yet, when one man in a one-bedroom flat on the Isle of Wight does an interview, these all-powerful people are running around with their knickers in a twist like someone's just shouted fire. And you know, when I said on the video that I did with London Real that I'm more powerful than they are and they know it, well, that is confirmation. Why are they bothering with me, one guy in a little flat on the Isle of Wight, doing one interview? Because truth has its own power, and it is far more powerful than untruth, lies, mendacity. And so they are terrified of the truth coming out, because when people see what that truth is, for them, the whole thing unravels. So what we've been seeing, and I've talked and written about this over a long period of time, what the game was. If you're going to control billions of people, you have to control their perception. From their perception comes their behavior. Now, what greater example do we have than current events? People believe what the official narrative is about this quote virus. And as a result of believing that and coming to those perceptions, their behavior is that they go and sit in their house under house arrest. That's how it works. Control perception, you control behavior. Now, how do you control perception? Where do we get perceptions from? We get them from information that we receive from all different sources. And if you only get your information from mainstream sources, you will get the mainstream perception that the mainstream wants you to have. And so the idea has been, as the years have passed, going on towards the end game, is to completely control the information that people receive, thus controlling overwhelmingly their perceptions, which leads to controlling their behavior, what they'll accept, what they won't accept, what they'll challenge, what they won't challenge. And the way to do that in totality is to get information that people receive onto the internet. Because then, through algorithmic codes, you can dictate what people see and don't see without any human input once the codes are in place. This is what's happening. This is what Google use. This is what YouTube use. It's what Facebook use. And we've only just seen the start of it. And the rest of the media, ironically, I've described the print media and the televisual media and the radio media to an extent, as in relation to these current events, to not only be voting for Christmas, but to have actively created it. Because the hysteria that's been generated has led to what we see now. And I'm already seeing stories of journalists being laid off because these people can't get advertising like they did before. And as these newspapers disappear, and they are disappearing at a fantastic rate around the world, so journalists won't have jobs to do. I say journalists, most of them not journalists at all for reasons I'll come to. But what happens as a result of that is more and more and more and more and more information moves on to the internet to be dominated by Google, by YouTube, to a lesser extent Vimeo, and by Facebook, etc. And so you enter more and more communication into the realm of algorithmic control. This is what the plan is. I've been writing about it for long enough, and now we're seeing it happen. But the point is that the so-called journalists in the mainstream, and I'll explain why they're not journalists in a second, are not bright enough, and certainly do not have the backbone necessary to see this and challenge it. And so that's why they are turkeys voting for Christmas and Thanksgiving, and indeed creating it. And I find it interesting too that there are certain key things that you say, and I said in that video, which sets them off. The old Corporal Jones character in the Dad's Army series, where he keeps shouting, "Don't panic," while doing exactly that. Don't panic, don't panic. Well, what makes these all-powerful billionaires? Oh, we've got so much power. Oh, shut up. What makes them say, "Don't panic, don't panic," is the truth. And that's what they want to shut down, the truth. So that there are certain key things that if you say them and you get that reaction, like YouTube, Vimeo deleting the video, and then Facebook, you have pressed the magic button. And I'm still seeing people, Gaz, in the alternative media, here and there anyway, more than here and there, who are still putting out that what we're experiencing with current events is the release of some kind of bioweapon from the lab that's been identified in Wuhan. What I find interesting is that if you say that, you're not censored, not from what I've seen. But if you say what I said on the video, and if I said it again here, then YouTube will censor it again. They may even censor this because I'm about to expose them. But as we've shown with the way that the people have passed around that video outside of these major corporations and censors, it's possible to get this information out, even without them. And of course, by censoring that video, they have just highlighted to people, this guy's saying something you ought to hear. I mean, in this, don't panic, don't panic. They, what happens when you get into that mode? You stop thinking straight, and they stop thinking straight. So suddenly, one guy in a little flat on the Isle of Wight does an interview and presses the buttons of what's actually going on. And suddenly, these all-powerful people don't know which direction to run fast enough. And what happens when you panic is, A, you stop thinking straight, but also you go big time over the top. So what we had was YouTube and then Vimeo deleting the video. And then Facebook followed. But then Vimeo followed up out of nowhere yesterday and deleted the entire content of Iconic, which is a fantastic platform with multiple subjects covered. And it's just an amazing gathering of constantly increasing information, series, documentaries of all subjects. And what I want to do here, just to show you that this is actually nothing to do with, oh, we must protect the people. Oh, no, I won't say.
The other thing as well that needs mentioning in terms of that whole Iconic network is that London Real interview that they've lost their minds about. It wasn't even on there.
No,
wasn't even on there.
Because you see, this is the point, guys. I'm just going to come to this with Vimeo's reasons for doing it. We've had an email from them now. They can write. That surprised me, first of all. But anyway, what they're trying to do is silence me, not just because of this video, but because of all the other areas of this conspiracy that I expose, which all connect, hence not connecting videocasts. So you're absolutely right. That stuff is not on there, but they still deleted it. And like I say, we're in the process of sorting it. So, you know, just give us a few days and we'll be there again. But this is what Vimeo said were the reasons for just deleting an entire massive platform of videos. One, that content on Iconic encourages self-harm. Now, what do you think, Gaz? Have I missed something? What?
Yeah, madness.
Madness.
If anything, most of the material on there is encouraging the opposite.
Exactly. Exactly. But they don't, see, these people don't deal in truth. They can't because they're lying. So you're always going to find them out lying because they don't deal in truth. Number two, that the content includes major atrocities or hoaxes. Hello? Well, if they're talking about some of the things I've said on just one program on Iconic about 9/11, I'm not saying 9/11 was a hoax. 9/11 happened. My question is, who did it? But you can't have that debate because they don't want you to know who did it. if you do want to know, there's a book called The Trigger, my last one. That'll explain who did it and why. And this is the best one, Gaza. They deleted the content of Iconic because there are videos and programs there that, this is the quote, perpetuate and question vaccine safety. Now, isn't it funny that they do this just after all this furore about what I've said about the background to current events? They're not mentioning any virus here. These are completely different, but they just want to shut me up, because this is not about anything other than censoring those that challenge the official narrative with the truth, which if people saw it, they would realize in large numbers that it is the truth, as they have with this video. And they stop buying the lies as they did before. So it perpetuates and questions vaccine safety. So does Robert Kennedy Jr. in the United States, who came out this week and condemned Bill Gates, who's driving this vaccine, condemned him for vaccination programs that left people paralyzed and sterilized. That's a member of the Kennedy family. And we have a situation whereby in the 1980s, the drug companies, Big Pharma, were getting so many lawsuits about damage by vaccines that the Big Pharma cult-controlled Capitol Hill passed laws giving exemption from prosecution to the drug companies for the effects of their vaccines, after which, of course, there was an explosion of new vaccines, because they can't lose now. But perpetuate and question, well, you mustn't question. Vimeo doesn't want you to question. YouTube doesn't want you to question, because you might find the answers they don't want you to find.
Well, that's the joke. The joke as well is billions are paid out.
Yeah, just let me finish this one point, Gaz. They created a vaccine court in America, funded by taxpayers, not the drug companies. And since they started that, with an incredibly high bar to prove your case, it's so far paid out $4.2 billion in vaccine injury compensation, destroying lives, ending lives sometimes. So here you have a court, Gaza, that is paying out those sums of money with the incredibly high bar to prove it. And yet Vimeo is saying that they've taken down the content of Iconic because it questions vaccine safety. Now, I'm going to come as we go along into how all this fits together, because all these companies are controlled by the same people ultimately. Sorry, guys, you were saying just now.
You said exactly what I was about to say.
Right.
Which was the fact that because now you can't sue the pharmaceutical companies, what you can do, like you said with the vaccine courts, is sue the American government. But then the American government pays out billions, which is taxpayers' money. So the people are paying for Big Pharma to damage, maim, kill people.
Yeah. Now, when you look, Gaz, at that situation with the 4.2 billion, and I can't keep emphasizing enough that the height of the bar, how many other people who don't get compensation have been damaged. The very fact that you are moving towards, as they are in many American states, they're already there, mandatory vaccinations. What that means, that's fascism, by the way. If you can't decide what goes in your own body, that's fascism. I mean, that's mess about. But looking at the figures of damage, it means that mandatory vaccination imposed by the state is, quite clearly from the statistics alone, going to condemn a certain group of people, kids mostly, to vaccine damage, who might have been people whose parents says, no, we're not going to have the vaccination. So that's guaranteed that some people by state imposition, some kids by state imposition, are going to be damaged by vaccines who wouldn't otherwise. And if people, oh, take that video down. If people only just look at the facts, the basic facts, I mean, half a brain cell is all you need, you'll realize that that statement is quite obviously true.
That's the thing about vaccines that I find very strange, is that you're not allowed two sides. So for me, if I'm a parent, I'm looking at it, I want to go, right, what I want to hear from is I want to hear from the people that are saying vaccines work, and I want to hear from the people that are saying vaccines damage. Yeah. And then I will make my mind up based on those two sets of information. Whereas you're not allowed. It's that, and that has to go. And in terms of it being about safety, I was just thinking of an example off the top of my head. Like, if you'd have made a video, if there was a video on Iconic that was saying these seat belts, these, life belts you get in cars, these aren't safe and these are doing this damage, they're breaking shoulders and collarbones and doing this, they wouldn't have been deleted.
No, but what it tells you something, Gaz. You see, it's this very simple thing. You find this with all tyrannies, and we are living in a tyranny, quite obviously. We've been living in a tyranny all along, but it's been a hidden tyranny. Now it's come out on public display with all these lockdowns. Anyway, what it tells you is this, that all tyrannies, and we go back to what I said earlier about controlling information, all tyrannies, when they can't win a debate, and they know they can't, on information, then they ban the debate. It's quite simple. If they thought that vaccine safety, and also if they thought that they could challenge what I'm saying about current events, then they wouldn't have a problem with the other side being put. Because they'd say, oh, we'll make mincemeat of him, we'll make mincemeat of them, because we've got all these facts and information to prove them wrong. But they know they can't prove me wrong. And that's why the video was taken down by all these powerful people. And that's why they're stopping debate on vaccines, on the whole transgender explosion, on climate change. Another hoax, by the way. Can I say that, YouTube? Is that all right, having another opinion on climate change? What do you think, Susan Wachowski? Eh? So they shut the debate down. And that's what all this censorship is all about, shutting the debate down. Now, what you have is not only these Silicon Valley giants doing this, you have the mainstream media who suffer from an extraordinary level of self-deceit because they think they're journalists, who are cheering them on to censor information that challenges the official narrative. The BBC and all these people this week have been cheering on the fact that that video was censored, and that the government regulator of broadcasting called Ofcom, censor, that's all they are, headed by a woman called Melanie Dawes. And this is the same Ofcom, by the way, that promotes 5G and is very much involved in the rolling out of 5G, that wants to stop anyone saying anything about it in the context of what I did in the video. Before I just come to the BBC article and one or two others, just to show my case, there are no journalists, by my definition of journalists, in the mainstream. There are people, a rare and genuine group that are trying to be journalists, but the system won't let them. And there's the vast majority who aren't journalists at all. I'm going to come to one in a minute at the BBC. And what do I mean by that? See, there are no journalists at the BBC. There's none. There's repeaters of the official narrative. That's what they are. The BBC is not a news organization or a journalistic organization. There are no journalists there. It is a government department. What they call journalists at the BBC are basically civil servants. They don't realize that. They think they're journalists. Self-deceit is amazing, but they're not. And I'll tell you why. Let me give you my definition of a journalist. And it's not really my definition, it's any sensible definition. A journalist takes a situation and takes the official narrative that's coming out from authority. And a proper journalist then looks at what is being said and investigates it to see if it stands up. Not with an agenda, not with a preconceived idea, just dispassionately checks the facts and whether it's true. A proper journalist looks at the contradictions and the things that don't make sense, and they investigate them. And when they've gathered their findings together, they communicate those findings to the public on the basis of what they have genuinely found and what the evidence genuinely says. Now, that's what a journalist does. And because of that, there are no journalists at the BBC or in the mainstream media. Like I say, there are some who are genuinely trying to be, and it must be a nightmare for them. But most of them are not journalists at all, because what happens in mainstream journalism, absolutely what happens at the BBC, is you have parameters. You have parameters that you have to operate within. And so there are vast areas of happening, society, possibility of explanations of all kinds that you can't go there. You have to operate within these parameters. In terms of the BBC, it's we must perpetuate and repeat the official narrative. And at the same time, this is how the BBC maintains its unbelievable bias, is it makes sure that people challenging that narrative don't get on its airways. And if they do, they get attacked in very short time. So there is no journalism there, because the journalists at the BBC and in the mainstream in general are not looking dispassionately at the evidence and investigating, see if it stands up, and then communicating what they found. They're within this parameter. So if a BBC journalist started questioning the official story of current events, they'd be out on their ear so fast, their feet wouldn't hit the ground. Same with all these so-called journalists in the mainstream. And so not only are they simply purveyors of the official story without any questioning, they are also gatekeepers who seek to discredit and silence, in the case of the BBC this week, those that are proper journalists and are challenging what they won't challenge, either because they're so clueless they don't realize there's anything to challenge. Oh, this is what's going on. How do you know? The government said. Or they simply haven't got the backbone and the round ones to say what they believe is going on. One of the things that happens in mainstream journalism, places like the BBC, is your backbone has to be proven to have turned to jelly before you can possibly get a job as a journalist at the BBC. When I was there a long time ago, there was still a massively controlled organization, but there was still some proper journalism went on, especially under the last Director General of the BBC, who was there when I was there, called Alistair Milne. He was the last guy who really stood up for any kind of proper journalism, and Thatcher got rid of him. And ever since, there have been grey faces and grey suits in positions of power, overwhelmingly at the BBC, culminating with a guy who's been the Director General in this whole phase, called Lord Hall. He was head of news when I was at the BBC. And if I said that Lord Hall was weak as water, I may be libeling water and subject to a lawsuit. So this is what you have. The BBC is a government department. And so we come to the reporting of this video being deleted by YouTube. It's now flying around the world, passed on by the people. And it's written by a BBC, I almost said journalist there, cool, wash my mouth out, called Leo Kellyan. And Leo Kellyan makes statements that are completely unsupportable because he's clueless. He don't know anything. He's never done research outside of the tram lines in his life, I doubt. But anyway, Leo Kellyan. He also has a Twitter account, and I was staggered to see how tiny the numbers are. This guy's posting to himself on Twitter, but he works for the BBC. So he says in this article, YouTube tightens rules after David Icke 5G interview. He says, during the interview, Mr. Icke falsely claimed there is a link between 5G and this health crisis. How do you know that, Mr. Kellyan? How much research have you done into that question, that area? Zero. What you've done is let the official story tell you that they're false. And this is the sinister bit. YouTube only deleted the content after the session had ended, because it was obviously live to start with, despite being aware of the broadcast while it was ongoing, says Kellyan. This is the sinister bit. It changed its rules after the BBC questioned why the video was permitted. So, ladies and gentlemen of Britain, you are paying through the license fee, mandatory license fee, for a BBC that's not only there to give you the official story of everything, but is almost patting itself on the back that outside of anything to do with the BBC, it is helping to silence people putting another story. This is the BBC which you are being forced to pay for. Maybe people might contemplate reconsidering paying for your own censorship. So this article by Kellyan goes on to say that it changed its rules after the BBC questioned why the video was permitted. But I want to quote you what YouTube said to this bloke. We have clear policies that prohibit videos promoting medically unsubstantiated methods to prevent the coronavirus in place of seeking medical treatment, and we quickly remove videos violating these policies when flagged to us. What the hell has that got to do with what I said in the video? And by the way, these Silicon Valley censors were targeting people saying that high doses of vitamin C were good for the immune system, at the same time that New York hospitals were giving patients high doses of vitamin C because if it was effective. It goes on. Now any content that disputes the existence or transmission of COVID-19, take that on board, ladies and gentlemen. Any information that in any way questions the official story of this situation we're facing will not be allowed to have their voice heard. That happens only in fascist, communist regimes. Don't let them kid you that we live in a free world. We don't, clearly. There's more. Now, any content that disputes the existence or transmission of COVID-19, as described by the World Health Organization and local health authorities, brackets, same thing, is in violation of YouTube policies. This is Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube, which is owned by Google. Got to come to that. And who is the second biggest funder of the World Health Organization, second only to the United States government? Bill Gates. Who is driving the policy worldwide about the virus? The World Health Organization and Bill Gates. Who is funding virtually all the so-called research into a vaccine for this virus? Bill Gates. So we have a situation, Bill Gates, Microsoft, Silicon Valley, who stepped down from his work with Microsoft just before this started out. That's just another coincidence, nothing to worry about. He funds, basically runs, because of that, the World Health Organization. And YouTube is saying that anyone that says anything that's different to the World Health Organization narrative has to be censored. In other words, Bill Gates' narrative. Now, 6 weeks before this kicked off in China, there was a thing called Event 201, which was the simulation of a coronavirus pandemic involving the Gates Foundation, the World Economic Forum, the 1% Fest at Davos every year, and others that have been involved since it kicked off in China. And if you watch the videos of this simulation, they are saying that what we have to do in this pandemic is to censor people who are questioning the official narrative. And for reasons I'm going to come to, YouTube is always going to do that. So this is what we're looking at. And then Facebook, after the video on Facebook got 1 million views, they pulled it. Because they don't care about you. They don't care about your right to hear all sides and then make your own mind up. They are there to indoctrinate your perception, to dictate your behavior. That's what it's all about. And so we have this report by ITV. Facebook removes, that's it, so-called independent, it's not. Independent television news, it's called. A bit of a joke in the title alone for people around the world, that's what it is. Facebook removes David Icke coronavirus 5G conspiracy video. And it says here, echoing the BBC, shortly after ITV News contacted Facebook, the video was removed for breaking misinformation rules. Well, on that case, ITV and the BBC would never appear on bleeding Facebook, would they? But here we have again. It happened after we contacted them. These are supposedly journalists. You know what real journalists stand for? And without it, they're not real journalists, because these people aren't either. It's the free flow of information and the right to the free flow of investigation and the end of censorship that allows truth to be pursued without limit. So all these newspapers and these characters at the BBC and ITV, if they were real journalists, would be kicking off like crazy over this. And they'd be saying, look, you may not agree with him, we may not agree with him, but what is it saying if you're censoring someone for having a different view of a situation that's fundamentally changing human society? That's what journalists do, and that's why these people aren't journalists. Or one reason, there's lots. So not only are they not kicking off to protect the free flow of information and opinion, they are helping and cheering when it's censored. Turkeys voting for and creating Christmas. And then there was the Sun newspaper, a lady called Charlotte Edwards also covered the story. And she says here, Icke also used the platform to make the false claim that a coronavirus vaccine will include nanotechnology microchips. Ms. Edwards, how do you know it's false? I have been investigating what I've been putting out full time for 30 years. I have spoken to insiders, I've spoken to whistleblowers, and I've traveled to 60 odd countries in pursuit of the truth. You, Ms. Edwards, will not have spent 30 frickin' seconds investigating whether nano microchips, all told to me in the what was being done in the 90s by CIA scientists. You won't have spent 30 frickin' seconds investigating that. But, oh no, it's false. How do you know it's false, Miss Edwards? Well, the authorities said. Thank you. You're not a journalist, are you? But this is a let me just pick one. Actually, there's another one here. Second, yeah. There was a comment, two comments. That's why I've just picked that one up. There's two comments at the bottom of this Sun article by a lady called Anna Richter, and she says, 5G could be incredibly destructive to the human body. We need real studies proving this is safe. Otherwise, big business and the governments they put in place to rule over us are playing with our lives. Thank you, Mr. Icke, for informing the masses. And she goes on, also, Sun, thank you for publishing this article and giving Mr. Icke so much free press. You have turned him into a sensation now, and tens of thousands of people who would never have heard of this interview will now watch it. So that's what happens, you see. When you panic, don't panic. That's what happens. You stop thinking straight. And more people now are aware of my information, which I compiled in the books and everything over 30 years, than ever would have been if they'd have just let it run on YouTube. Because they may think they're powerful, but when you break it down, they're actually not very bright. And it says something that people that are not very bright can have so much control over people worldwide. And they do that simply by putting the target population in a smaller box than they're in. And we can break out of that anytime we like.
I've had so many messages over the last couple of days from people that I've known for years through football or ice hockey or music or whatever that aren't into any information at all, saying, "What's this? Can you send me a link? Can you send me a link?" And it's all just because of the kickoff from the BBC and others. So you're right, they are, you know, letting it or making it expand. The other thing I will say about these articles, obviously, which I've read, is they're massively misleading in terms of what people are saying.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
they don't mention, as we have and many others the whole time, that the whole thing is multifaceted. It's not a case of 5G, bang, that's it.
Yeah,
There's so,
exactly.
yeah,
It's one aspect.
it's one aspect of it. And so what they use, and I've seen it a lot, is, well, that country's got coronavirus cases and doesn't have 5G. And often, actually, they're mentioning countries that do have it. So they're saying there's no 5G in Australia, there's none in Japan, well, there is. But because they never mention the fact that because 5G is just an aspect of it, we're not saying that it's 5G. We're saying it's an aspect, it's a part of it. There's lots of
Yeah.
other bits.
And one quick thing about Japan, by the way, Gaz, is that Japan is next to China and has not had a state of emergency. So obviously the coronavirus arrived by snail into Japan. But this week, the Prime Minister of Japan announced a state of emergency. 2 weeks earlier, they turned on 5G in Japan. But you can't make these points because the mafia that control Silicon Valley doesn't want people to consider even the possibility. And that's the point, you know. I mentioned earlier that they want to move information out of what we've perceived as the mainstream media up to this point and onto the internet and the Silicon Valley platforms, because then they can censor by algorithm. And so we have Google, which is controlled, run, owned by Sergey Brin and Larry Page. We have YouTube, owned by Google, that is run by Susan Wojcicki, who is the sister of Anne Wojcicki, who runs 23andMe, the DNA operation. And Anne Wojcicki was married to Sergey Brin at Google. In fact, Susan Wojcicki was involved in the whole emergence of Google, according to the reports that I've seen. Then you have Facebook, that is run by Mark Zuckerberg and the chief operating officer, Sheryl Sandberg. And then you have Vimeo, which is, of course, behaved absolutely disgracefully, to complete insult to freedom and fairness this week, which is effectively owned by a guy called Barry Diller. So those people, particularly the first ones I mentioned, have extraordinary power now over what globally the population see and hear. And as the mainstream media loses more and more ground, that control of what you see and hear is going to increase and increase and increase. There is something that connects Sergey Brin, Larry Page, Susan Wojcicki, Mark Zuckerberg, Sheryl Sandberg, and Barry Diller. With all that global power over what you see and hear, all of them come from 0.2% of the global population. Anyone think what the statistical chances of that may be? And anyone think in the mainstream media, it might just be worth saying, well, why did this come about? And when I say 0.2%, I'm actually talking about far less than 0.2%. Because 0.2% is the Jewish population of the world. But I'm not talking about Jewish people and the Jewish community. Friends of mine in Israel have been sending me reports of the lockdown by the government of Israel on the people of Israel. And it is as, if not more, draconian than anywhere else in the world. You see, we're not talking about Jewish people or Arabic people or American people. We're talking about an elite that has contempt for all people. People talk about, Israel, that's the Jewish people. Well, hold on a minute. Why is the government of Israel treating the Jewish and other Israeli people in this lockdown with such utter draconian contempt? In the same way that's happening in other countries, because we're not talking about this race, this group, or that group. We're talking about an elite that dictates to all groups. And what we need to do is put down these fault lines of race and religion and belief and realize that we're all, whether Jewish, whether Arab, whether whatever, we're all in the gun sights of the same elite. So why is it not questioned why a fraction of 0.2% of the world population has control of all these areas of Silicon Valley that are increasingly dictating everything you see and hear, and, present company not accepted, censoring everybody that's putting out a narrative that they don't want you to see? That's what this is about. Brin and Page, Wachowski at YouTube, Zuckerberg, Sandberg, they don't give a shit about your freedom. They just serve their masters. And what if the same force ultimately, it is controlling all of them? This is what's going on. And this is why they're trying to shut me up, not just over this virus thing, but in other areas too, hence Vimeo, Barry Diller, trying to shut down all the other information. It's because after 30 years of investigating this full time, they know I'm telling the truth about who really controls the world. And truth to them is like garlic to a vampire.
The big point for me, and I say it to a lot of people that aren't even into a lot of the investigative stuff. So I say, right, forget 5G, forget vaccines, forget this, forget that, forget all of it. Explain to me why, and it's so blatantly obvious, they are cooking the books and making coronavirus figures higher than they truly are. I mean, I'm getting messages from people whose family members have died and have been labeled with coronavirus on their death certificate, and they're kicking off because they didn't die of coronavirus. So if you've got a global pandemic which is threatening all of us, why do you need to make the figures higher than they really are? Just that simple question. Why do you need to do that?
Exactly, massively higher than they are. I mean, what's starting to happen now, slowly but surely, is physicians and people in the medical profession starting to seep out and point out this thing that's going on, where whatever you seem to die of, you are said to have died of COVID-19. And I saw some very interesting figures this week of deaths from all causes compared with last year. And as the death figures for COVID-19 have gone up in their figures, so the number of people dying from other causes has gone down compared with other years. So anyone see a connection there? What do you think? Oh, sorry, YouTube. Too much truth. Susan Wachowski's shouting panic. So yeah, that's a great and obvious question, and the answer is pretty bloody obvious as well.
It is. I had a conversation with a guy the other day, and I was saying that if they want to make a vaccine for coronavirus, then it would cure other diseases. So just give it to everyone to cure every other disease, because apparently you can only die of coronavirus now. You can't die of cancer anymore. No, if you stay in your house and you don't go out and you just watch telly, that cures cancer now. So that's a result.
Yeah, well, two things to that. First of all, there was there's a video on davidicke.com at the moment, and it's a physician in America, a lady, who's explaining how the death certificates have been manipulated to have coronavirus on them all over the place. And this is now coming out in more and more countries through the medical profession, who people just seeing what's going on and are absolutely freaking sick of it. But the other side of it is that, deaths are going to go up compared with what they would have done, which will, again, give them more chance to put coronavirus on the death certificate because of the lockdown. You've got old people shut away with no exercise. How many old people are shut away on their own? Late in life. Yeah. Their husband's gone or their wife's gone. And one thing that will happen in the fear that's been generated is that some of these people are losing the will to live. And when you lose the will to live, it is fatal if it's deep enough. Then you've got people not getting the vitamins they get from the sun, vitamin D, etc., because they're not going out enough. And then you've got all the stress and fear, the stress alone of being locked away. I mean, you imagine, Gaz, some of the places around the world that people live in, terrible conditions, but now they have to stay there. And so you're going to have an increase in people who are dying. You're going to have an increase in suicides because it's driving people crazy. So these will then end up on the figures for COVID-19. This is it's unbelievable. We had this situation this week with Eddie Large, the once well-known British comedian, who went into hospital with heart disease. Apparently he's had a bad heart for a while. And he goes in with heart failure. And what they're doing when you get into hospital, they're testing you for COVID-19, which they're not testing you for COVID-19, testing you for a genetic material, which many people have in their body. It's nothing to do with a virus. And so because they've got it in their body, when they do the test, they test positive. And they say it's testing positive for COVID-19. It's testing positive for a genetic material. Explain all this in that video that's banned by YouTube. So he goes in, like all people are going in to hospital for various things. And they're testing them for COVID-19. And when they die of what they were dying of, they then say they die of COVID-19. This is how it's working. And there's another thing that's very, very important when we're looking at the number of people who are dying. And that is how many people are dying and have been condemned to death by the fact that hospitals, in the midst of this hysteria, because people are going around all the time showing hospitals being empty. Well, why are they empty? Because the pandemic war zone is not there in all these hospitals that they're claiming. And people have shown that on their phone cameras when they've been around them in different parts of the world. But also they're empty because they've stopped other operations and they've stopped other consultations, including cancer consultations. So this lockdown, through delayed operations, delayed consultations and diagnoses, will have condemned to death a large number of people on that basis alone. And, you know, I don't keep repeating that this cult I've been exposed to for 30 years are super psychopaths just because it's a phrase. I say it because they're super psychopaths. And therefore, if you look at the character traits of psychopaths, there's something called the hair test, named after the bloke that came up with this. And he listed a series of character traits. And if you have enough of them, you are officially designated a psychopath. And right at the top of that list is lack of empathy. No empathy, deletion of empathy. And empathy, I've long called empathy the fail-safe mechanism of human behavior. Because if you have empathy, in other words, you can put yourself in the feelings of others resulting from your actions, then that's a fail-safe mechanism, because you're getting an emotional consequence through empathy for how you're affecting someone else. When you have no empathy, because you're a psychopath, that's what these people are. The psychopath doesn't even cut it. We need a new word for an extreme psychopath to even get close to these people. When you don't have empathy, you have no emotional consequence, no matter how you make people suffer. In fact, these people get off on people suffering for reasons I explain in the books. So this is what we're dealing with. They couldn't care less about old people. They want rid of them. That's why it's coming out more and more and more and more through medical professionals and through loved ones and families that old people are being pressured to sign do not resuscitate forms. Even people in orthopedic wards. It's a scam. The whole thing's a scam. If you don't like that YouTube, well, you can stick it up your ass, frankly. I don't mind.
How many people is that going to kill? Having a do not resuscitate form. And like you say,
yeah. And you know what's going to go on the death certificate? COVID-19. And he's still got people in the alternative media saying, oh no, it's a bioweapon from the Wuhan lab. Oh, bollocks. Where are all the people dying from the bioweapon? Ooh, hadn't thought of that. And there's one other thing I want to mention this week, Gaz. Just knocking this on. This is the way I'm seeing it. There will come a point, sometime in the later summer, when they'll start to roll back these lockdown impositions. Some of them. Not all of them or anything like, but they'll start rolling it back. And there'll be a period when you'll have a little bit of a respite. And then when this vaccine arrives, which I have said from the start existed before the thing happened, and now they're just winding people up with all this research funded by Gates. Oh, we're looking for a vaccine. Just before this vaccine comes online, you're going to see another wave of the virus. And because of the precedent set by what's happened now, there won't be a gradual incremental movement to total lockdown. Because this incremental movement is only incremental to where they planned to get all along. It's not happening by stages. Oh no, we're not doing enough. It's only just getting people what I call the totalitarian tiptoe towards where they wanted to go anyway. But because this precedent's been set, what they'll do is go straight into lockdown, and they may even come up with something. I won't mention the means by which they could do it, because that's banned now, apparently. There'll be more hysteria just as the vaccine's coming out, because they want to make this vaccine mandatory. And if not forced upon you, then if you want to come out of lockdown, you have to have the vaccine or you can't, basically. And who has said that? Bill Gates. Bill Gates has said, you can see the clip on davidicke.com, that the world cannot go back to normal. It never will. Until we have a vaccine that we've gotten out to virtually the entire world. This is where it's leading. And if people have the vaccine, then they should certainly get fully paid up membership for life for Naivety Anonymous. Because what's happening here is so blatant, and it's so blatant that that's why the psychopaths of Silicon Valley want to silence me. Oh, one other thing before I go, in terms of dropping this forward, projecting this forward, they want to, what they are in the process of, getting control of food. Not only do they want to control people through this whole lockdown situation, they want to control food and who has it and who doesn't. And what's going to happen as a result of this lockdown is that food production in the world is going to fall, because they want it to fall. And then there is a plan, ultimately, that food, even food that we eat now, will no longer be the food that we eat. And it will go to some kind of synthetic situation. Not tomorrow, but that's the plan eventually. And so there's a plan to create artificially a food shortage. And you want to eat? Best do what you're told then.